Okay, Natalie, we're live. Thanks for joining me and jumping on my podcast. Just for my audience, I know the basis of our conversation today is going to be around fear and how we can overcome it. But maybe if you can just give a brief introduction for my audience and your background and why this is your topic of expertise.
Yes, so thank you so much for having me today. I think it's going to be a great conversation. I am currently living in Israel, which is an exciting place to be in the world at the moment. Originally from Australia, have lived in London. This is my second time living in Israel, so I've traveled quite a bit. Background is mostly in human resources and I've always worked with people in mostly large companies, and we have recently moved to Israel about a year and a half, so with my husband and two children. And this topic has just become a bit of a passion or obsession, I would say, because I feel like the world as it is at the moment, most of us are really living in fear, whether that's sort of from the news that's creating this environment or just life in general. And I think the topic today is going to help a lot of people understand what they're actually feeling. So I'm really excited to get started.
Sounds good. And I'm just curious, and before we jump into it, was there anything specifically in your life that triggered this passion for fear? And you said, okay, this happened to me and I need to learn more about this and teach people how to overcome it. Is it anything in specifically, or is it just kind of generally your observation of the world today?
No, I'd say everything that I do is from life experience and something like a lived experience that I've gone through. So I'm sharing with everybody, real data. So that I've read it and I, think, oh, okay, here's the scientific evidence that shows that you're all living in fear. Personally, for me, it was quite a big of a crisis that I went through in my early 40s. So, the midlife crisis, as everyone likes to call it, where I was living in Australia, and I had all of these things that apparently are supposed to bring us ultimate happiness, sort of the job, the house, the white picket fence and the money. And it just did not bring me what, everyone said it was going to. And that led
Mhm.
to quite well, I would say, very significant crisis in my life where I was just forced to assess, looking around me, like what is actually going on. I had no understanding of it. And I was that type of person that was always in a rush, always running from place to place, always working, and probably never gave myself a chance to actually sit with any of my emotions at all. And then it all just came out. So as a result of that, my poor husband, we moved to Israel within 2 weeks. So I just basically said, I don't want to be here anymore. How about we go back to Israel, which is where we'd lived before? And he was, thank God, okay. And literally within 2 weeks, we packed 5 suitcases and left. So that kind of move and that kind of crisis obviously is going to have consequences. And it led me to really have a think and look very deeply into the topic of happiness and fear and emotion and what got me to that place. So I would say for the last 1.5 years, I've really been researching this topic to nauseum because I think that I needed to understand what I went through. Thank God for me, I've had a major, major transformation. I would say I'm quite unrecognizable, not only to myself, but to people who know me very closely. And it's been a really good comeback for me. But I know that it's not like that for everybody. And I guess that my mission is really to help others see the light at the end of the tunnel, to help them really understand more deeply what they're feeling and going through, and to help them, be successful on the other side.
Yeah. No, I think that's great. So, I mean, let's get into it and let's talk about what you've learned. So anybody listening to this can learn something. So I can learn something from this as well. And so the first question I want to ask you is around fear, and it's has such a negative connotation, or it's viewed as a very negative emotion. But the first thing that came to mind for me is that if you look back evolutionarily, fear plays a very important role in our lives, right? And it still does in the modern world. It keeps us safe. It makes sure you don't walk out in front of a moving car and get hit by a car. And in the past, it prevented us from being attacked by a lion. So or something like that, a wild animal. So why is fear now viewed so negatively, and how do you balance that where it plays a important role, but it can also have this negative connotation?
Yes, I completely agree. I think we're using this so freely now in our language. Like, I'm so stressed, or I'm really scared to do that. And we don't realize how many times in the day we actually speak in that way. And also, we say these things around our children as well. And I've noticed, like, we say it too often, and that actually has a direct impact on how our children are feeling now. I'm too scared to do this. I'm stressed. We use these words too often. And that's why, it's become so negative. So I'm really scared to do that. Okay, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it just because you're scared to do it. So I think we need to take a step back and actually think about how we're speaking and what we're saying, and therefore what's that telling our brain all the time? It's putting us like in an inertia situation where we don't act on anything because we're just full of fear all the time. I don't think that our environment helps either. I think that we're constantly bombarded with scary news and sensationalized situations that create a lot of stress in the brain. And yeah, if we think back to what it actually was, it was just a primal instinct to say, okay, we're in danger. We can either fight or flight, or we can deal with this situation. But so many of us are just, we're not dealing with it. We're just running away. So I think it's become, yeah, for those specific reasons, we need to step back and stop and think about like our life and what we're exposing ourselves to and how we're responding to it.
And to that point, I mean, would you say that the modern world kind of causes that fear response to misfire? I mean, you just mentioned it. I'm so stressed. I'm gonna lose my job. And
Yeah.
the way I look at it is like if you trace that all the way back to its root, a true fear response is trying to a survival response to make sure that you remain alive and you don't die. And I think the reality is if you lose your job, in most cases you're going to be okay. But we have that primal response. So I don't know if that resonates at all, or if you could speak to that. But it just seems like the modern world is just not wired for what this traditional emotion is, right? So I don't know how we overcome
Yeah.
that, but
Yeah, because I think that we have the emotion and we're in the environment of like social media or tech, or again, like this constant bombardment of negative news. So it's almost like, okay, if we lose our job, oh my God, what's going to happen? Like there's no light at the end of the tunnel. And all of that is just a fear of the unknown, or, not having sort of control over the future, which none of us have control over anyway, even though we might think that we do. So it's, yeah, our society and what we expose us to doesn't help us manage these situations.
and so how can we better manage that? You talk about the negativity on social media, on the news. How can someone better manage that this new phenomena that we're exposed to on a daily basis at all times, right? If you have an iPhone, if you have a smartphone, and you're on social media every day, you're being bombarded with
Yeah.
this stuff.
Well, I think I mean, I read recently, if you look at the news first thing in the morning when you wake up, you're 25% more likely to feel depressed that day, just because you've exposed yourself to something negative in the morning. Your morning time is a really crucial time of the day to distance yourself from technology, from social media, from like external things coming into your world. So that morning time is actually a really, really important time to take control over the day. And how do you do that? You don't let negative influences come into your world. You wake up in the morning and you physically put your phone away. So many of us are addicted to it. And the only way to stop that addiction is literally like having physical distance from the phone. And I say this to a lot of people and they think I'm insane when I say this, that I don't look at my phone till 10 o'clock in the morning. And they say to me, what if this, what if that? What's the worst thing that can happen to you if you don't look at your phone until 10 a.m.? What's the
Yeah.
worst case scenario? What's going to happen to you? Nothing. Okay. And if there's, God forbid, like an emergency situation, you're going to find out about it. You're going to know about it. So I think there's small steps that you can do. You should expose yourself to sunlight first thing in the morning. You should be going for a walk first thing in the morning. And it's all about gaining control of yourself so that then you can conquer the day. And I think you really need to limit the amount of news that you're watching. So especially now, especially living where I live, if you're sitting there watching the news all day, every day, of course you're going to feel stressed. Of course you're going to feel full of fear. Of course you're going to have these terrible, dark thoughts. And there's a difference between being aware and acknowledging what's going on around you and becoming obsessed with the news. And we do this because we try and control the situation that we're in, and we cannot control the situation that we're in. And part of this is also the fear of the unknown. Again, this fear, what's going to happen to me? If I know every single detail about what's going on, I'm in control of it. No, you're not. No one knows. It's taking these proactive steps in the day to safeguard yourself, to create like a little bubble. I also say to people, don't watch the news before bed. Then you're going to have nightmares all night. Like it's picking those 1, 2, 3 things that you can do. Limit the screen time. Like I think, for some people, yeah, you can go cold turkey, but I think it's just what is a more realistic approach is to put measures during the day where you can distance yourself from something that is going to cause you stress and anxiety, and screen time and scrolling and news and all of these things, scientifically evidence proof that it does. So it's just, and again, this is part of daily habits. This is part of putting these measures into the day. This is part of taking action. What can we control? Those little things we definitely have control over.
Yeah. So if you're willing to share, I'm curious, right? Because I think you're right, but easier said than done, right? And so I know you mentioned, okay, you don't look at your phone before 10 a.m. How long did it take you to solidify that habit? Did it take you quite a while and you built it up with time? Just curious.
Yeah. So I think, again, like a lot of these things, we look at people who have developed these approaches to their life or developed these habits and we think, wow, they're amazing. All of these things take hard work. All of these habits take time to develop. So you start small. You say, okay, it depends how addicted you are, but it depends what time you get up. But they say that the first sort of hour of the morning, from the time that you wake up to the time that you look at your phone, that 1 hour is really precious. So that's the first hour of the day. And I read recently that if you look at your phone first thing in the morning, the cortisol in your brain, the stress is 3 times more than if you did it. So you're actually causing yourself stress first thing in the morning. So it's just being aware of that. Yeah, and taking small steps. So, don't look at it for 10 minutes. Don't look at it for half an hour. Build yourself up. And then if you have a day, like I've had a day where I've had to break that for whatever reason, that's okay, as long as you're not breaking that habit every day. And then I start, I also put my phone away. If it's physically close to me, you're much more likely to look at your phone. If it's actually nowhere near you and it's up in a cupboard, up there, and you can't actually physically see it, that's another way to help yourself. Get outside, go outside, get some fresh air, build habits into your day. What we've recently done in our house is we walk our kids to school every morning now. Much to their dismay a lot of the time. But that's our way of being exposed to sunlight, taking a walk early in the morning. Often it's not easy to do that when you have children. All of these habits, as you say, are easily said and done. What if you have kids? What if you have to do this? What if you've got work? Try and find a way to implement these habits within your framework of what's reality for you. So as I said, we've been managing to take the dog. So that's, the dog gets walked, the kids get walked, they're exposed to sunlight. They're not looking at their phone. We're not looking at our phones. And by the time we get home, it's more possible. So I just think it's about being creative. And the thing with habits is doing something small every single day. That's how the habit actually sticks. So even if you do 20%, you've still done something rather than nothing.
Yeah, I like a couple of your points. Is first is set up your environment to make it sustainable, and then also view it in a long-term lens. Like this should be something that you strive to do for maybe the rest of your life or for a prolonged period of time. And you're not saying, hey, get rid of your smartphone, but don't look at it before 10 a.m. and then you can look at it afterwards, right? So I like those points. I want to circle back. So I think you're touching on a point where eliminate fear, eliminate negativity from your day is really important. But I also think fear prevents us from striving to better ourselves, like whatever the scenario is, like, oh, don't go for that job, you're not good enough, you won't be able to do it. um, can you maybe speak to how someone can overcome those fears or that voice in their head that says, oh, you'll just fail if you do this, right? I think that is a lot of what holds people back. How does someone overcome that voice in their head?
I like the word failure that you've used, because I think most of us fear failure, and that comes from perfectionist tendencies. And why are we all trying to be perfectionists? Because of social media, because of technology, because we look at other people's situations and we say, wow, they're really successful. But they don't understand that behind that success, that person's failed 10 or 15 or 20 times. And you interview anyone, like any billionaire, and they'll tell you, I've tried 10 different companies before they were a success, or I failed at 50, but I just kept going. What differentiates that person to someone who hasn't succeeded? They've just kept going and going and going. And they've accepted that failure is part of the process. It's unheard of. Oh, it's very unusual for you to try something the first time and for it to be this massive success. So I think you need to understand that as part of trying something in life, part of having that fearlessness is that it could not work out. The next step is, what's the worst thing that can happen if it doesn't? Talking that
Yeah.
through in a rational, because a lot of fear is irrational and then it causes inaction. So it's saying, okay, what's the worst thing that can happen to you? You don't get that job, you'll get another one. It's sort
Mhm.
of taking that panic away from the situation. And my saying is, what's the worst thing that can happen if you stay in that job? Sometimes that's
Yeah.
that's a worse situation to be in than if you actually try and leave. So I used to sometimes do that rational thinking with myself as well. I think also positive self-talk is really helpful. So as you say, like the stories we tell ourselves are terrible. They're doomsday. And I sometimes find myself waking up in the middle of the night being scared of something, or of, stressing about something the next day. And I often use like positive self-talk to get myself back to sleep, for whatever situation that I'm in. And I find that's really helpful. So none
Yeah.
of this is easy. It's the other thing to know. None of this is meant to be easy. But I think knowing that that potential failure is part of the process and accepting that is the first step.
Yeah, I think it's expectation, right? You need to have the expectation of whatever you're doing. If you're going into a new job where you don't have a lot of experience, that it's going to be hard and you are going to
Yes.
fail. But then it's just continuing to go push on regardless of that is how, like you said, how you build success over time. So I mean, it's just that expectation. So I know you've started a company recently. Maybe you can speak to some of the failures you've experienced along the way, and if it gets easier as you go, right? So you start a company, you try to acquire your first customer, they say no, you get 10, 20, 100 no's, and then you finally get a yes. How do you continue to deal with those no's, right? Because it causes you to feel discomfort, to feel fear, to say this sucks, why am I doing this? How do you keep going in the face of those challenges?
So I think, again, when you use the word expectation, I think that's a really good one. I think it takes time to build a business. It's not going to happen overnight. Someone once told me it could take 5 years to be a profitable business. I think it's having that expectation up front that it's going to be a long road, not a short road. I think all of those no's force you to think about why that was a no, if you're going to be successful at it. So it's an internal, check. Did I not target my audience properly? Was my proposition, is my sales proposition not the right one? It forces you to internalize and go, what could I have done better? Where did I go wrong? And to also seek help. I think a lot of us try and do everything ourselves initially and be a jack of all trades, and when we can't all the time. So do I need to bring in advisors? Do I need to get a coach? Do I need to get a mentor? Do I need to ask for help? Like, can I just not do I not have the right skill set? Like, and get feedback as well, I think is really important. But if you're going to sort of say, if you're not going to internalize and analyze what went wrong, I think you're going to have problems in those
Mm-hmm.
situations. So that would be sort of be my top 5. And often we aren't targeting the right audience. We're not, what someone get by interacting with me or engaging with me, what are they getting out of the situation? Like, how am I helping them specifically? I think that that's really important. Like, what practical tools or steps, or what's the value proposition for them?
Mm-hmm.
So I think they're all really good questions to be asking in that situation.
Have you found too, just in your experience starting a business, that as you go, you naturally learn as you go, and opportunities and naturally arise, and you say, okay, I need to go in this direction? Because I think another part of it too is that someone that wants to take that first step, whether it's starting a business, new job, whatever it is in their life, and they say, I don't know where to go, or I don't know how the path will open up. But I think we've talked about this before. It's stepping into that uncertainty though, right? So I don't know if you found that from your experience. Maybe you could speak to that. Is that, yeah, you still don't really know where you're going, but you figure it out as you go. Is that true?
Yes, that's exactly true. So that's why I got my business name, Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. I have no idea. Like, in the beginning, I had no idea where it would go. I just started sharing my musings on LinkedIn. And then all of a sudden, after some time, there was an audience. I didn't
Mm-hmm.
know I didn't know if what I was saying was going to resonate with people. I didn't know whether, I was being too out there or too crazy or what people would think of me. But I felt compelled to do it. It was like a passion that was driving me forward. There was a purpose, there was a why to why I was doing it, and it was there to help people. And what I also like to do often before I act is seek feedback. So I talk a lot to my friends, or I talk a lot to people I know, and I interview them almost, and I ask them questions. And I saw that everybody my age group was going through the same thing. Like, they were in a crisis. They had no idea how to get out of it. They didn't even know they were in a crisis, but they knew that there was something wrong. And I saw all of these consistent themes being spoken about. I thought, hang on a second. This is a real issue. It's not being spoken about enough. There was one TV show that was aired last year that talked about the 40s crisis, but other than that, I haven't really heard much being said about it at all, and definitely not in the way that we're talking about it today, that it's based on a lot of the time on fears. Um, and so I felt like compelled to put it out there. And honestly, every single time I share something on LinkedIn, I get that little bit scared. Like, how are people going to resonate with it? Are they going to like what I've said? Often I delete some of my posts because it's just not the right messaging to be. It's taking all of those leaps and knowing. Like, a lot of the time I've posted stuff and it just flops. It doesn't get engagement, or people don't like what I'm saying, and I delete it, and I say, okay, today I didn't do well, but tomorrow hopefully what I'm sharing people will like, and you just get back on. A lot of this is trial and error. It's not getting it right every single time. um and sitting with that, that fear is very important. Because, okay, today wasn't great, I didn't do well, I don't feel great about it. Often I take a few days off just to distance myself from whatever project that I'm doing. And a lot of the time with your own business, it's only you. Like, you don't have anyone else to consult with. And it's really important to build a community, like, where that build your connections, build a community, seek feedback all the time is what I would suggest.
Mm-hmm.
And often these things, I think this has been successful for me because I didn't have grand plans for it in the beginning. I recommend, like, keep your job and do it as a side business, like, do it as a hobby. Don't make these drastic changes in your life where you quit your job and all of a sudden it's, okay, I'm going to start a business now, I'm going to quit my job. And it takes a really long time. You have to see how you go. Like, again, like, start small, build it slowly, seek the feedback, trial and error. Don't have the right expectations for it. I think then the risk factor is lower.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, right? You talk about posting something on LinkedIn that flops. If you still have your job, I mean, does it really matter? You use it, you learn from it, and you keep pushing on. But and other people have told me this as well. If you don't plan ahead and you just quit your job, and you say, "Oh, I'm going to start whatever it is. I want to be a LinkedIn influencer without understanding the effort it's going to take. I mean, that's when you fail. That's when you quit and you say, hey, I can't do it. I'm going to have to go back to another job. And so that
And also,
planning, right, is important.
exactly. And also, there's a reality perspective. I need to earn money. Like, I need to support a family. I need to earn money. Like, that's reality. That's not like, and it's much more palpable to do these things and take these risks when you have your day job and you have your money coming in. It's very hard in the beginning with any new business. Like, the financial component is hard because you're trying to
Mm-hmm.
earn money and you're trying to do something new at the same time. So, until you see a profit, that can take some time. So I'm not recommending to, as you say, like, quit your day job and go and do, your first startup. It takes time to build.
So I'm curious too, just to pivot a little bit, thinking about what holds people back in general, or I'll give an example. Somebody that works as a checker at a grocery store, and for whatever reason, they stay in that position for their whole career, right? They don't strive to be a manager or strive to learn new things. I don't know if through your research you found I'm trying to understand why people do that. They aren't striving for more. They're not facing that fear. They say, "Hey, I'm good here. I'm just going to work this cashier job for my entire career, and I'm okay with it." What causes that, or what holds people back in that scenario like that?
Well, firstly, not everyone wants to be a manager is something that I've learned through my experience as well. At the end of the day, from my in-depth research into happiness, it's when we have a purpose and what makes us feel good about that. So maybe that purpose is different for everybody, and it doesn't matter what purpose that is. Maybe that for that person, the fact that they're providing and putting food on the table is enough for them. That's their purpose every single day. They don't strive for anything more, and that's okay. A lot of us, who are coming from me also, like, I was like, okay, I want to be that next role and that next role and that next role, and I want to be, a CEO, and I want to be like, it was a constant kind of strive for the next job and the next job. Again, that didn't bring me that didn't bring me the happiness that I signed up for. Why? Because that wasn't my purpose. That wasn't making me feel good about myself. That wasn't my innate desire is to help people. So that career wasn't giving me that. So that's one school of thought. And the second school of thought is, I think a lot of people recognize that they need to change their life. They have no idea how to do it. They literally have no
Mm-hmm.
idea. And sometimes, we're more comfortable in something that's bad for us because it's familiar rather than the unknown. Okay. And as you say, like, anything unknown is scary. Anything unknown causes us fear. And that fear causes us inertia, causes us to stay in what is familiar to us. The bad job, the bad relationship, the bad environment. For me personally, I woke up one day and I was like, okay, my environment is not good for me. I'm not my best self. And because I have that fearlessness approach to life, I moved countries, in 2 weeks. No one's expecting anybody to act like that. But that's the bit that's missing. It's the action. Okay. So the inaction is causing people to not change anything. And what we need to do in this situation is, what are the small steps? It's how do we make change? We do it gradually. We do it through small steps. And if I was to speak to someone, I would say, like, let's reevaluate your situation. What are the small things that you can do to change your life? I think if we give ourselves tasks or goals that are too high, we don't do anything. It's too scary. So we need to break it down. And I think also a lot of people, it's a self-esteem thing as well, if you think about it, because if we're like, I'm not good enough, no one will accept me, I'm not going to be able to get that new job, we don't believe in ourselves enough. Sometimes we need help with that too. But I think my first point is really, really important. Like, maybe that person's happy. Like, we're very
Yeah.
judgy. We look at someone and we think, how could they do that? For instance, we walk our kids to school every morning and there's someone standing there for free. He does his volunteer, like the lollipop man, where you cross the road and he stands every single morning. He stands there, happiest thing ever. talks to us, talks about the dog, like he's so happy. He does this completely, like, you know, as a volunteer. Loves it. I could never
Yeah.
do it. It's not something I would do, but he seems to be really happy doing it.
Yeah, and I think we just relate from our experience. We say, well, I couldn't do that, so how can he? But we'd have no
Yeah,
idea about his background, his upbringing,
right,
his where he lives, his
right.
family, whatever it is. Yeah, so it's a good point. And I think too, I was more referring to the person that is the cashier, and they're saying this sucks, but I don't have the confidence to go for the
Yeah,
manager position or go for a different job, for a sales job at a startup. Um, so maybe if you could talk through that a little more, like what that process is, and you made a really good point. And I think that people in general just are really bad at this is they see the far off goal in the future. They see themselves, oh yeah, I'm imagining myself being that successful salesperson, but I'm not that today. So I have no idea how to get there. And to your
yeah.
point, I mean, it's a thousands of small steps in between, right? And so is it just taking that first step? Is that the key of like, okay, what can I do tomorrow and over the next 3 months? Is that the key to moving forward?
Yeah, so I think, and I keep saying this today, but I think it's that fear of failure. You know, so if I go for that job and I don't get it, like what's the worst case scenario for me? Like I would be having that conversation with someone. You know, it's a fear of failure is the first issue, and that causes the inaction. And the second thing is exactly what you said. Change doesn't happen overnight, and it's those small steps that you take. And I often say this to people, like, don't worry about the future now. Just worry about, like, take things hour by hour. Like, sometimes just take a step back and live now in this moment. What can I do now? What can I focus on in the next hour? And what am I going to do tomorrow? And don't look beyond that,
Mm.
because it's often too scary to look beyond that. Um, and we have no control over the future anyway. So, and then what help do I need? Like, what counsel do I need? What support do I need? And often, you know, I think back to like when this is my second business that I've started. The support network that you get at home is crucial. So many people say I could never leave my job and do a startup, because who would do everything that I do? Like, especially for a lot of women at home, they're like, oh, if I left the home, who's going to do all of the other things that I do now? You need a lot of support. You need a lot of logistical support. You need a lot of emotional support. You need the right infrastructure that will allow you to propel you to move forward, to even consider these things. Um, and that is a very, very important part of the process. And I would be looking at that support system very well if I was considering kind of changing my situation, because without that, it's almost impossible. Because as you say, we can't be everywhere all of the time. We need to be very specific with our time and what we're going to be devoting our time to. And without, you know, that backup or that support, it's almost impossible to do it. So they would be sort of the three things that I'd be looking at.
Yeah, and just kind of a comment on that. I mean, I feel bad, and maybe I think you said you have kids as well. So I don't have kids currently, but growing up, I know that I had supportive parents. So I think it's just difficult as well when you're in a situation where your parents are not supportive and they say, "Oh, you could never be a sales rep. You should just stay at the grocery store," right? And that
Yes.
kind of really hurts a kid's confidence, I would imagine, from the get go. And so it's even a bigger climb. So I don't know if you can think of like that scenario where you don't have the support at home, maybe from more of like a parent perspective, but you still want to do more. I mean, how do you overcome that when I mean, your parents raise you, you live with your parents when you're growing up. So it seems like it'd be hard to avoid.
Yeah. So I think, look, we've all got our own traumas, don't we, from childhood.
Hmm.
That's their parents' fear talking. That's not actually their fear. By saying you can't do this, you can't do that. Well, that's about them. That's not about the child. And again, it's in that situation, I would come back to, let's continue with our day job and try and do this like as a hobby first and as a side business. You know, so it's less risky, so it's more
Yeah.
easily able to to turn into something. And I think also as we get older, we need to understand, okay, take my situation. Like I wasn't told that I can't, that I can't, I was told the opposite. Do that university degree, do that second university degree, do that third university degree, go into that career because that's going to give you X, Y, and Z. Hang on, that didn't give me what I signed up for. You told me that was going to give me X and it didn't. So now what? And I had to learn that in my early 40s, which is not a great stage to be learning that. Very hard lesson. It's the same thing. It's saying, like, what are we ingrained to think? Like, what all of that is so influential, like how we were raised, what we were told to think or feel or act, or, what we were told is success. It's like another way of saying, like, how do we get out of that mindset as well? It takes a lot of courage as well to break free. It takes courage to do something different. It takes courage to go against the status quo. And I know we talked earlier in this conversation about, like, we look at people who have done that and we think, wow, that took so much courage to do that, whatever they were doing. It's not easy. Like, it's so much hard work. It's so many setbacks. It's so, like, feeling the fear and doing it anyway. It's like pushing through and not caring what people think of you. Like we spend so much of our time thinking, okay, if I do this and I break away almost, what's everyone going to think of me? You can't control what other people think of you anyway, so stop worrying about it. You have no control over, it's those kind of like growth points I think are really key to our learning and transformation and success.
Yeah, you make a really good point of more of the breaking away from more of the traditional status quo success. I mean, you still get flack from friends, from family, right? And it's maybe something you wouldn't expect, but it's a really good point. So you just talked about something too, where when you do that and you've done it as an example and you feel the fear, you feel other people judging you, saying, oh, that's a stupid idea, it's not going to work, why don't you just keep working in HR and climbing the corporate ladder, whatever it is. And so you have to sit with that judgment, that feeling. Another example we used earlier in the conversation is you go for that sales job or promotion or whatever it is and you don't get it, and you feel crappy when that happens. So is there a technique, or what do you do specifically to be able to sit with that feeling and be okay with it, right? Be okay with the discomfort. Is there anything specifically you can do to build that skill almost?
I just want to talk about your first point because I can give you 10 examples of where I've done something dramatic and everyone looks at me and goes, she's crazy. Like, what's she doing? Like, many times this has happened to me. And I would say this move from Australia to Israel is another example of that. I mean, that's a drastic one. But I knew what people were saying, and I knew they looked at me and they were like, why would she leave that corporate job and move countries? Like, what's she doing? You need to stop listening and paying attention to what other people are saying about you, because nobody understands your situation better than you. Okay. And in that situation, obviously, you need a supportive environment around you. I had a very supportive husband. I had very supportive friends. And if you don't have that, look for it. Hire a coach. The support is really important. The second point around how do you sit with emotion? It's worse not to sit with emotion, because if you ignore emotions, all you're doing is causing your body to be unhealthy. So that's what happened to me. I can give you my example. It's a suppressing of stress and emotion for 42 years. And then all of a sudden my body just gave way and was like, I can't deal with this stress anymore. Like, you're not paying attention to what I'm saying to you. So you don't have a choice at one point. You become unhealthy as a person. And so you're forced to face these emotions. And again, I know you and I have talked about survival mode. Like, so many of us live in survival mode permanently. We're running. We're ignoring what we're feeling. We're suppressing our feelings constantly. And we're doing this because we don't want to face what we're going through. And it's worse because as we ignore our emotions, they sit there longer and they fester and they become worse. I think techniques, like practical techniques, which is what you're asking of me, turn the phone off, turn technology off. Okay. Again, that is just another cause of stress. Go for a walk, get some sunlight, read, listen to a podcast. go get an ice cream with someone. Accept that failure is part of the process. And someone once said to me, it's a really, really, really important point. You need to accept that you're human is the first thing, because many of us don't accept that we're human and that we're going to feel things. It's normal to feel things. It's okay to feel things. And it's okay to stop and sit with that emotion. What's not okay is to let that emotion get the better of us and then to put us in a cycle of inaction and inertia where we just, we're stuck and we don't actually do anything. So that's where we say, okay, today wasn't great. Today wasn't a success. Tomorrow's going to be a success. And this happens to me often where, as I said to you, like I take a few days off. I distance myself from the problem so I can get clarity and then I come back to it all refreshed. So it's not obsessively trying to fix it all the time. It's saying, okay, I didn't do well with this. I failed at that. It's making me feel really crap. So I'm going to take a step back and I'm going to do something nice for myself. I'm going to cook a meal, or I'm going to spend time with my family, or I'm going to do something completely different from work. I'm going to do something creative, or I'm going to do something that makes me happy. That always brings me back to myself, because I can achieve it cooking a nice meal and I feel really good about myself, or I've gone out with a friend that night and I've helped them with a problem, or I've just had fun.
So I'm curious, have you found also when you sit with an emotion, you post something on LinkedIn and it flops, right? And you just say, okay, whatever, I'm anxious now, I'm nervous, my chest is tight. But if you just sit with those feelings, you say, okay, I just feel this way. So what, right? It doesn't matter. It doesn't change anything about what you're doing or where you're headed, right? So is that part of it as well, as just sitting with it and just realizing that the feelings are somewhat powerless as well? Is that a process you've gone through?
100%. And I say I do this at night. I often wake up at night panicked, and nervous, like, is this business going anywhere? What, like, is it ever going to make money? Is it, normal fears? And, I wake up the next day and it's all okay. It's exactly, it's sort of saying to yourself, and like that positive self-talk in those moments is very, very helpful. Like, it's acknowledging the emotion. I'm feeling really stressed at the moment. It's even saying it out loud. I feel really stressed. I'm really worried about the future. I'm really worried about money, which could be one of like a common stress. And just saying, okay, that's what I'm worried about at the moment. Tomorrow I might not be worried about that. It's not, that doesn't mean that I have to shut this business down and go and get a job, now because like today I feel bad.
Yeah. And also, go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say, I used to do that. I used to be really reactive. So I'd be like, okay, that's not working. Plan B. Like, quickly plan B, let's go. And then I would act on plan B and be really impulsive, because I'd be like refusing, just exactly what you say, just to sit in the moment and accept it for what it was. And that caused me to be impulsive and make a bad decision, rather than just accepting that, yes, this is part of life. Some days are really hard and we feel really stressed and anxious. And on those days, what can we do? Let's just turn on Netflix and watch watch The Crown, like, to make us feel better. Like, that is today only. That doesn't need to be tomorrow.
Yeah. And I'm curious too, another part of it, or way I look at it, is like, you're feeling bad for whatever reason that day. And then you start looking into, okay, well, why am I feeling bad? Why am I feeling this way? And then you ruminate about the feeling. And then that just kind of compounds and causes even more negativity than, like you said, just sitting with it. Hey, it's just one of those days. It'll move on. I'll move on. So I think that's an interesting thing too, that people do, is like, okay, why am I so stressed? Why am I so anxious? And then just searching for the source, when that may not be the most prudent way to do it. Right.
And I just want to add something else to that. I have a checklist in my mind when I feel like that. Did I sleep enough last night? Sleep is a massive contributor to stress and anxiety. So lack of sleep is a huge reason why people feel stressed and anxious. Like, did I move enough today? Like, did I get outside enough? Like, these are basic needs that we have. Did I watch my phone too much? Was I on technology too much? Like, what did my day look like? Did I take on too much that day? Did I let other people's negativity in too much into my life that day? You know, what did I allow in to my day? I do that checklist in my head. And sometimes you need to do that analysis, and sometimes it's just you didn't sleep well the night before. And it can be that simple, rather than it being kind of like a doomsday situation. So you sleep well. I say to myself, okay, tonight I'm going to go to bed a lot earlier. I'm going to put my phone away earlier. Like, I'm going to put away at 6. Like, those small things. And I wake up the next day and I feel a lot better. Or I'm going to read before bed instead of turning on the TV. Like, it's those simple little things that actually make a massive difference to our mental health.
Yeah. And I think we could talk about mental health too, but I think you make a really good point, right? Like, someone says, hey, why do I feel so bad, so crappy? And then if you're an outside observer and you say, okay, well, you don't exercise, you look at your phone all day, you eat processed food, you stay up late, you don't sleep. Like, from someone observing from the outside, it's very clear, right? But you yourself may not realize it. But with time, right? You make a little change and you say, okay, I'm not going to look at my phone. I'm going to only watch an hour of Netflix today. And I'm going to go to the gym, right? And you play around with these things. I think you make a really good point that you can tweak things, do self experiment, and realize what works and what doesn't. But to pivot, the mental health crisis, right? It's something I hear a lot about. I'm sure you do too, that young people in general are more stressed out. There's more mental health problems than there have been in the past. I'm curious your perspective on that, and if you feel that is the case, and if so, what generally is causing that?
So I think COVID was a massive, I think we're still recovering from COVID. I think that was life changing. And in many cases, it's, again, like, the impact of that was huge. So if you look at kind of, from school age children, the sense of isolation that occurred there, that lack of social connection, caused a lot of anxiety for a lot of people. And I think that work, sort of the nature of work and family, was so disrupted. Again, we're still recovering from this. Like, to go from a situation where you went to an office every single day and then all of a sudden you were thrown at home to be around your husband or kids, wasn't normal. It wasn't normal to see each other 24/7. And a lot of us are still working from home. And, we're missing that social connection. It's very, very isolating and lonely to not be around people. We're meant to be, we're social beings. We're meant to see people. We're meant to be in a community. We're meant to have connection. So that's caused a lot of problems. Financially, things are getting harder. Again, coming off the back of COVID, like, interest rates are getting higher, cost of living is getting high. We can't keep up with it. And part of it is a society sickness where we're just obsessed with more and more and more, and we just want more and more and more. And a lot of us need to take a step back and go, actually, and this is a whole nother podcast with you about what actually defines happiness and success. But I think we're obsessed with more. So we're never going to keep up. So that's where the financial stress comes in. I think we've got a lot of adversity. Like, and again, the news, the stress, the wars, like, considering where I live as well, like, when are we ever going to stop? I think the point is it's not. So it's, how do you survive in these situations? Like, how do you cope? Like, what are the coping mechanisms? Stress is going to come in your life. Okay, for everybody. You can't control, like, the external world. You can't control that there was COVID. You can't control that there's a war. You can't control that there's a financial crisis. How are you going to cope? Like, what are your coping mechanisms in those moments? But I do think, again, and I come back to the phone, it's killed families. It's, we're all used to we're communicating on the phone. We don't even know how to communicate face to face anymore. Like, COVID caused us to have, like, that social distancing. I don't think we've recovered from that. Now there's a war, so people are they're hesitant to go out or to do normal things. Life is not normal. So it's about what steps can you implement in your life specifically to cope in these environments. And I think there's so much research being done at the moment on in university age students where their stress is very, very high because they're obsessed with grades. And again, it's this whole conversation with you about like what is happiness, what brings us success. Is it, you know, getting that really good job? Like they're just misguided as to what kind of they should be reaching for. So that's also causing a lot of stress. Like their basic needs aren't being met. Adults' basic needs aren't being met. That need for connection, that sense of community, I think is causing a lot of loneliness.
Yeah, but a lot of good points. I want to focus a bit on technology, and I'm curious your perspective on this, right? Because I know that you have a following on LinkedIn. I mean, we're recording a podcast right now, which will be likely consumed via a smartphone, right? So we're in the kind of the content producing game, but you mentioned that for a lot of people, I mean, it faces stuck in the phone. I mean, there's a lot of negatives to it as well. So how do you balance that, or how do you deal with that where you're saying, okay, I benefit a lot from social media, but I understand that it has downsides to societies, to families. Is it balance, or how do we use the positives of it without allowing it to negatively affect our mental health, our society in general? I don't know if you've thought about that at all.
Yeah, I think about that probably all day, every day. A very bad relationship with technology right now because I have a teenager at home who's obsessed with her phone. So we're battling with that personally. But I think it's, as you say, like everything in moderation is good. So let's use the benefits of technology. As you say, you and I are communicating right now. Like obviously when you want to build your brand on LinkedIn, that's a great thing. But how much are you doing that per day? Are you sitting on LinkedIn for 8 hours a day, or are you sitting on LinkedIn for 2 hours a day? What times of the day you're doing it? Who are you ignoring in the process while you're fixated on your phone? Or, I think it's just limiting your screen time and being very conscious about when you're actually on those devices. So much to my daughter's dismay, we've created a situation that from 6 p.m. to 8 a.m. the next day, she doesn't have a phone, which she's not liking right now. But what are the benefits of that? She's part of the family. We can communicate with her. We haven't lost her to a device. Again, this is not easy, and we're building it each day. And it's going to take some time to build this new habit. But like physically putting the phone away is the only thing that seems to be working. Even when you go out for dinner with people and their phone's on the table, I put my phone in my bag now because I don't even want to look at the phone because I'm sitting with my friends and I
Mhm.
want to be present in that moment. Like I don't want to go out for dinner with someone whose phone doesn't stop ringing, or it's not pleasurable for me. So I think it's just being conscious of when and I find also at the end of the day, if I'm feeling really stressed, I think, how much was I on my phone? How much was I on LinkedIn today? Like, if I feel really overstimulated, it's because I was on technology too much. And it actually is causing me like a bodily reaction to it. Like, it's a very, very stimulating thing to be on these devices for too long. So it's just also acknowledging, like, health wise, how are you reacting to that? So say, okay, I was on it too much today. Like I didn't sleep well. It affected my sleep. I had nightmares. I was on my technology too much today. It's just listening to yourself and what emotions you're feeling. And I may have sidetracked a little bit right now, but it's not an easy thing to do. I know
Yeah.
someone who at dinner time, their routine is to put the phones like in a basket. They sit and have dinner, and all the phones just go into a basket, and they sit and have a family dinner. Like the phones aren't on the table. So I think it's just it's hard.
Yeah. It is hard. And I'm curious, I think you said you were in your 40s, so you grew up, I imagine, pre-internet, pre-iPhone. So I don't know. Just your perspective, maybe on if you think back to when you were growing up to where we are now in terms of technology. I mean, did you ever see it going this way? I mean, it just feels so entrenched in all of our lives now.
Yeah, I think that's part of the problem that I grew up without phones. So I understand like the benefits of not having them and being outside and like playing with my friends. Like we built forts and we had cubby houses and tree houses and we just went outside like we were children. So I think that's why it bothers me even more because I know that we can live without them. Um, But I think it's just it's accepting that life is not going to be like that. Like you have to accept that technology will be part of your life and your children's life. But how do we work with it? So, with another thing we do is we choose one day of the week where they're not allowed a phone. They're not allowed an iPad. They're not allowed to be, Saturday is our day that we do that. And then how do we enable that? We're really busy. We invite people over on that day, you know, and they act like normal children should be acting. They kick a ball and they play Monopoly and like it's wonderful. It's amazing to see. So, you can't just take the phone away and then not give them an option. Like they have to be distracted somehow. That's the nature of raising children in this era of technology, but it can be done.
Yeah, I think you've come up with a lot of good methods, right? Like you said, you just don't take it away. But I also think a lot of the responsibility falls on the parent, right? I mean,
Yeah.
if other parents were kind of following your lead, you know, I think there is a middle ground here. So I think that's really cool. So as we kind of wrap up here to kind of bring this all together for those listening, and I don't know if you can do this, but a simple framework, or how can people begin putting these things into action? We've talked about it at various points throughout the conversation. How do you change your relationship with fear in 2024, right? We've just started a new year. Um, what actions can they take? We talked about eliminating the phone. We've talked about understanding that you're going to fail. But I'm curious if there's something you use with your company as a, hey, here's a beginner framework. Just start here and then we'll build up from there. What is that if you have it?
Yes, I think again, let's just go back to the fear thing. It's the first step is to actually acknowledge that you're in fear. I think is very important. And again, we've talked a lot about that today, like acknowledging that you're actually feeling something and that that's okay. Then that's really normal. The second thing is, what's the worst case scenario if you decide to make change in your life? Like sort of eliminating that fear of failure. What are having like making sure your expectations are in the right place. So yeah, you could fail, but what's the worst case scenario? And again, that comes from perfectionist tendencies that we have. And the third step is, yeah, let's not go crazy. Let's not move countries and blow up a whole life. We're not suggesting to do that. But what are the small things that you can do to make change in your life? Let's start with the phone, like taking it away for 20 minutes and then half an hour, or limiting coffee per day from 5 to 3 to 2 to 1. Like it's all of those small things, you know, it becomes impossible when we give ourselves goals that are just unachievable. I'm going to go to the gym every single day. I mean, that's not going to happen. Or if
Mm-hmm.
it does happen, it's not going to sustain itself. So small change is more sustainable than sort of large change. So let's just do things in baby steps. And I think seeking help and support is really important, getting feedback, because change is really hard and change is scary and it's the fear of the unknown. And what can our support network give us? Um, is probably the top few things that I would say. And again, I would say that this is all really normal. This is part of being a human being. Like it's not meant to be perfect. It's not meant to look like you're not meant to get it all right the first time. Like I think that is a really crucial part. Like it's that level of acceptance. That's something like you need to work at it every day. It's not going to like, and there'll be adversity to it, and there'll be people that say it's not a good idea, and why are you doing that? And it's how do you get through those moments as well of not caring, shutting out that sort of negativity, and looking at who you surround yourself with. I think is a good ambition for 2024. Who are you letting into your life? Are these people that raise you up, or are these people that are just negative? I think that is a very, very important consideration as well.
One point I want to call out is you said, I think it's important that you need to understand that other people, it's a common human experience, common human emotion, right? And I think a trap that people fall into is to say, oh, look at Natalie. She has everything together. She runs her own business. She's doing amazing. But as we talked about earlier, right, you're still learning as you go. and you're just at a different point in the journey. So I think it's important to realize that whoever you are looking up to, or you see whoever it is and think, oh, they have everything together. I mean, that's certainly not the case as well. And everyone's kind of going through their own version of it, right? So
And
something I want to
also,
call out as well.
that is an excellent point. The other thing is be careful what you wish for as well, because we look at people and we think, oh, they've got this amazing life, they've got a podcast, they're running their own business, they've got 10, wherever you put your time, something else gets compromised. So be very, very careful what you wish for. So if you're going to be out all day and not see your children, that's going to have also like negative consequences. So just be really mindful about your purpose and try not to like look at other people, because there'll always be something that they've given up or they've sacrificed to do what they're doing, and make sure that that's what you want.
Yeah. I've heard Elon Musk say on podcasts that people say they want to be me, and he says, "Trust me, you don't want to be me,
Yeah.
or you don't understand if to be the richest man in the world, what you have to give up to achieve that, right?" And I mean, I can imagine it's quite a burden. So, a very good point as well.
And one other thing I think is also very important is try not to talk to too many people about your idea until you're sure about your idea. I remember in the beginning, like as this idea was developing, everyone was like, so what do you do every day? Like, what are you doing now? I mean, I got this incessantly because I was someone that worked, 15-hour days in a corporate job, to all of a sudden I was this stay-at-home mum. No one could come, people still can't come to terms with it. People still have no idea what I'm doing. And I used to get really defensive in the beginning and go, like, feel like I needed to have, that story, that answer. And I thought, well, I don't even know what I'm doing yet. So how can I explain that to someone else? And do I even need to justify what I'm doing? Like, that's my personal journey. So just be really careful, like, who you let into your conversations. And again, when you have that idea, until you're sure about it, and until, don't share it too quickly either. Like, be really sure about what you're trying to achieve. And then once it's been running for a while, then share it. I think that's also some advice from personal experience.
Yeah, I resonate with that as well, 100%. Try, keep it, or maybe until you've achieved some success, and you can say, "Hey, this is a viable opportunity, and here's why." But yeah, I think keep it close, right, to close family if you want to share it when you're just starting out, but you don't need to shout it from the mountaintops or tell your
Yeah.
neighbor. Yeah, so a very good point. Um,
Yeah.
so to close here, I will give you the floor. We talked a lot about what you've learned. I mean, didn't talk a ton about your company, and I think we just kind of talked about it, like what are you doing? What is the goal? So maybe this is a good opportunity to tell the audience, everyone that's listening, what you're working on, how you serve people specifically with Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. So I'll give you the floor to close out here to let everyone know where to find you and what you're working on specifically.
So I've just launched my new website, which is very exciting. So it's feelthefearanddoit.com. And that is really going to be my main platform. And I guess what I'm trying to create is a movement. It's, a group of people that can use this platform to kind of recognize what they're feeling, not feel alone in the crisis, and to give them some inspiration, I guess, for how to move forward with their life. You can find me on LinkedIn, where I share a lot of my writing there. That's probably the main source of where you'll read my content. I'm about to start a podcast with someone, so I'll share more news about that shortly. But really, it's out there. It's there to bring people together. It's there to say that you're not alone in what you're feeling. Other people are feeling it too, and it's supposed to be a supportive environment. So again, I hope today's been valuable in that I've managed to give you some practical tools, because I think that's where people can fall down, is to say, okay, I now feel this. Now what? Now what do you want me to do with this? You've
Mm-hmm.
made me recognize that I feel fear, but I don't know what to do with that feeling. So hopefully today this conversation's been helpful in that regard. But that's exactly what a lot of the writing is there to do. It's there to give you some practical tools and tips about how you can actually move forward and push through these fears. So I I hope that's helped some people today.
Yeah, I think it was a great conversation. So again, thank you for taking the time to do this. I'm sure it will benefit somebody out there. All the information you just mentioned, your LinkedIn, your website will all be in the description. So again, thank you, and I wish you the best of luck. You're doing great work, and I'm sure you'll do big things. One step at a time. So thank you.
Thanks, Connor.
All right.